Howdy everyone, and welcome back to a Morrowind Retrospective. This is the second part in a series, so if you want additional context, I would recommend watching the first part first. It isn't required, do what you want. I'm not your mom, yet. Let me just start out by saying that Morrowind is very frequently praised for its world, and that this praise is very, very well earned. For a variety of reasons we will get into both in this video and in the rest of the series, Morrowind has some of the best world building and one of the best settings that I have ever seen in fiction, to the point that world building nearly carries the rest of the game single-handedly. So, let's talk about Vvardenfell. The Elder Scrolls III Morrowind takes place almost entirely on the island of Vvardenfell, which is one of several districts in the Septim Imperial province of Morrowind. The expansions would take us to the nearby snow hell of Solstheim, and the crime-riddled, goblin-infested mainland capital city of Mournhold. Vvardenfell was only recently opened up to major settlement, and the whole world space has this very strong frontier, edge of the empire vibe to it. You are at the very edge of the world. Everyone is here to exploit as much economic value out of the locals and the land as fast as they possibly can. And the oppressive and generally corrupt Septim Empire is, in broad terms, doing a terrible job of managing things. Morrowind's actual in-game world space is fairly small for an open-world RPG, being around half the size of Skyrim or Oblivion's world space. A lot of people have made the claim in various places around the internet for the last couple decades that the slow movement speed and low draw distance was part of some, wacky sleight of hand by wily old Todd Howard, the little bastard, to make the world map feel bigger than it actually was. And while the draw distance absolutely does contribute to that feeling of bigness, it's almost certainly not the way it is to make the map seem bigger. Morrowind barely ran on the Xbox, and even on PC, its assets are so horribly optimized that to this day, it can cause slowdowns on pretty modern computers in certain areas if you're not installing an optimization patch. The short draw distance was probably a concession to get the game to run at all on the Xbox, and if you extend that draw distance out, there are some genuinely nice vistas and long distance views that you can get that I am sure Bethesda would have loved for you to be able to see. Now, as for the slow movement speed, that is probably more related to progression than it is to any attempt to make the world seem bigger. Late game Morrowind characters are intensely fast and can cross huge swathes of the map at a blistering pace. The incredibly slow initial movement speed was likely an attempt to increase the feeling of power that you get once you've got some levels in you, not any sleight of hand to make the map feel bigger. The reason why Vvardenfell feels so large and so well realized has much more to do with Bethesda's commitment to world building and realism than it does to any technical limitation or gameplay sleight of hand. Morrowind is very, very dense, with a huge amount of encounters, quests, dungeons, and little setting vignettes. At any given point while playing Morrowind, you're more than likely within a 2 to 5 minute walk in any random direction away from something interesting. Most more modern open worlds tend to pad out their maps with a significant amount of empty or wasted space. To me, long stretches of nothing in a lot of open world games don't add much, and it feels like a waste of development time and resources that could have gone into more substantial content that actually matters. I feel the same way about aim-down sights and first-person shooters, but that's an argument that I don't think any of us are ready to have right now, but carrying on. Now, there are modern open world games that also have hashtag content within 5 feet of you at any time, but that game design is very different from what I'm talking about here, and I genuinely hate it with all my soul. In Morrowind, the map is very dense with stuff to do, but basically all of that stuff is handmade and bespoke, and the game has a very high density of meaningfully unique content. Most open world games have the same few activities repeated dozens and dozens of times across the map, with racing minigames and collectibles and towers that you gotta climb to reveal the map and fishing spots, etc., etc. This content quickly becomes grating and obnoxious due to sheer repetition and is sometimes indistinguishable from being randomly generated. In addition, frequently this content is parasitic, existing as a separate set of mechanics on top of what the core fun of a game actually is. You know, you'll be enjoying nuking some orcs with fireballs, and then the game will just be like, it's time to pick berries please, you better pick the berry at the right time or the goblin will get you. And it just isn't particularly fun. For all of their mini sins, across all of their games so far, even the ones that I have issues with, Bethesda generally does a good job of not falling into the trap of repetitive parasitic content that a lot of open world games do. There are exceptions. Fallout 4's entire settlement system is pretty miserable and parasitic, and Skyrim relies a little bit too much on Radiant quests, which are randomly generated. Morrowind itself doesn't always hit. A lot of dungeons, particularly ancestral tombs, can feel somewhat repetitive, but most of the time you'll find something that feels unique, like a special enemy, a unique item, a small quest, a cool book, just something to make it feel like the area has a purpose to exist and that activity wasn't just a waste of your time. Another excellent aspect of Morrowind's world space and design in general is its public transportation network. Morrowind has a better public transit system than the majority of American cities, like the one I live in has a worse public transit system than Vardenfell. The game lacks a traditional fast travel system in the vein of Daggerfall or Skyrim, where you just click an icon on the map to go somewhere, having entirely replaced it with a variety of immersive and in-universe transportation mechanisms. You can use a divine intervention or CV intervention effect to teleport to the nearest temple. You could place a mark and then later use recall to teleport back to that mark. You could ride on a giant space flea creature called a silt strider to travel between major population centers, old Alejandro, or charter a boat or pay a wizard to teleport you to another wizard, or you could make use of a very obscure and barely functional teleportation ancient network thingy that exists in the game. Using all or most of these, you can get to nearly any part of the map, and figuring out the cheapest and fastest way to get from place to place is a genuine skill that you develop as you play the game more and more. That said, importantly, this transportation network doesn't go everywhere. Some small villages are simply too insignificant to have a bus stop, and if you want to visit any ruins or remote locations, you're more than likely going to have to make an expedition from the nearest travel point. Morrowind lets you travel between civilized, built-up areas very easily, but the more wild parts of the island are appropriately more difficult to access. All of this leads to travel being a huge part of the majority of Morrowind's quest design. Quests that take place entirely within one town are very rare, and you will frequently be asked to travel to distant parts of the map. This is a sneaky way that Bethesda encourages you to explore its world, as a quest in Aldruin might take you up to Aldvelothi, a town you might never visit if you're not prompted to visit it. You could take a strider or a boat up to Cool and walk over there, which would lead you past a couple of egg mines, a small and somewhat shitty ancestral tomb, and a fairly major Daedric ruin that has quite a few quests attached to it actually that you can stumble into. Or you could take the strider to Nissus and walk from there, passing by a cave with a unique quest and a few more tombs. The game is constantly tempting you to get distracted and to poke your nose into things you probably shouldn't. This does cause some progression issues, which we will get to later, but it is a genuine strength of the game and the way its world is designed. Most quests that require you to travel to a cave or a ruin or anything remote will lead you past eye-catching Daedric shrines, Dwemer ruins, and old Velothi strongholds. And Morrowind really wants you to jump into those and see what kind of trouble you can get up to. Another thing that goes a long way towards making Morrowind's world feel more realized and inhabited is that there are, to my knowledge, very few bandit, raider, whatever generic NPCs in the base game. There are generic guards, which I dislike, but these are more of a gameplay consideration that ties into Morrowind's fundamentally broken crime and punishment system. It's not something that most players will notice. There might be a handful of generic goons in some quest or another, but that is the exception rather than the rule. The expansions would add significantly more generic NPC enemies in the form of the fucking Friss Hags in Solstheim, or the Dark Brotherhood goons in Mournhold and their ilk, but this was a huge mistake for reasons we will get into. This would set a trend for future Bethesda projects, which are all chock full of generic goons and raiders. The fact that almost every random bandit, rogue Telvanni, Daedric cultist, and outcast Ashlander has a unique name and at least an implied connection to to other NPCs through shared family names is a big deal. It gives off the impression that the world exists outside of your perception, and the hand-placed and custom-constructed nature of these NPCs allows Bethesda to do a lot more with them. NPCs frequently call each other out by name in notes, and then after you read that note, you can find, oh, this is that guy that it was talking about. I already killed him. They can be equipped or placed specifically to tell a story specific to a given area, or they could have unique dialogue and services if you use magic to calm them down and talk to them. One of the game's master trainers, who can help you max out a skill much easier than grinding it to 100, starts off hostile to you in a random cave and has to be calmed down to provide training. This is, to be fair, a bit of a gotcha, punishing unaware players with the loss of a trainer, but seeking out a master in a given skill and finding out that you killed him without realizing it hours earlier just makes the world feel bigger than you, and it makes these remarkably static and somewhat dull NPCs feel alive and connected to the world they inhabit in a way that games like Oblivion or Skyrim just completely and frequently fail at. Another clear strength of Vvardenfell is that a lot of thought clearly and obviously went into why its settlements exist and how the people of Morrowind can live in such a harsh environment. Vvardenfell's cities all have some sort of economic prospect or reason to be, and a ton of thought went into Morrowind's food supply. They have their own herd animals adapted to the harsh climate, such as the bipedal lizard guy guar things, which I love them, they're babies, that they use as pack animals and beasts of burden, or the netches, which are these huge floating jellyfish that are ranched for their jelly and their tough hides, which are the local equivalency to leather. Vvardenfell has several large plantations in the rich river delta in its southern edge, the only significantly fertile land on the island that isn't just a swamp. There are also a wide range of small farms across the map anywhere where something can grow. Many villages seem to exist more or less as fishing hubs and way stations for the boat network that rings the island, so there's a lot of thought put into what people eat. In addition, interior cities like Balmora or Aldruin exist as trade hubs sitting between the ebony and glass mines near Red Mountain, the inland Ashlander tribes, and the main imperial ports at Ebonheart and Seyda-Neen. There is also a good deal of illicit economic activity, with the coastlines, particularly the western coast, being riddled with smugglers' caves and slaver dens. Vvardenfell is under a quarantine during the events of Morrowind due to a major blight outbreak, so the smuggling business is thriving. Another strange source of both food and economic value on Vvardenfell are the Quama, a species of eusocial underground insect things that live in large underground warrens. The Dunmer ranch these creatures for their eggs, which are roughly the size of a 20-ounce can of Red Bull, and make up a large portion of the food that you will find in houses throughout Vvardenfell. Quama egg mines can provide a staple food source for an entire town in an area that absolutely could not provide any other food, and as such, egg poaching is a serious crime, and a mildly entertaining pun that a Bethesda writer came up with and is now very happy that someone noticed. Bethesda seems to have been acutely aware of the socio-economic layout of the world it's created, and a surprisingly massive amount of quests in Morrowind pertain to economics or trade in some way or another. I can think of at least 3 quests off the top of my head that are specifically about curing or killing the Queen of Aquama mine to fuck with the local economy, and another huge portion are tied up in the ebony trade, which is ebony is the crystallized blood of a dead god and is mined because it looks really nice and makes a good beaten stick. Or, the quest might be about the trade in illegal Dwemer artifacts. The first 3 questions that I ask when I'm looking at a world in a video game or really any fiction are, in order, what do they eat? Why is the settlement here? And what is the local economy like? Morrowind has more or less the best and most consistent answers to every single one of these questions out of anything I have ever encountered, and there isn't a single settlement that feels particularly out of place or unrealistic in the entire game, which is a hell of an accomplishment because the whole island is a volcano, just one big volcanic caldera. Molag Mar, for example, seems like an awful place to live in the middle of an actively volcanic hell zone, but it's a fortified church compound that exists to give pilgrims as aid and a way station on their way to the nearby religious sites. Aldruin is in the middle of a miserable volcanic desert as well, less lava, more desert, but it is defensible. It sits near Red Mountain, which is an area that is known to produce monsters that needs to be actively policed, and it sits on one of the only roads that leads towards Ghost Gate that doesn't sometimes fill up with lava and volcanic runoff. This makes it an important stop on the way over to Ghost Gate, which is a major religious site and defensive fortification that would need frequent supply from the outside world. There are also several mines in the area, both in Red Mountain and just around Aldruin, which provide a significant portion of the economic power of the Great House Redoran, which makes its capital in Aldruin, which also need to be policed due to the inherent danger of this volcanic hell desert. We'll get more into the Great Houses in a future video, and the culture of Morrowind on the whole. This one's already getting a bit longer than I intended for it to be. All in all, Morrowind has a really well-constructed world space that provides ample opportunities for adventure, while also being so well thought out and feasible that I have genuinely never seen another video game that puts even half as much work into justifying itself as Morrowind. The next video will be about progression, and why leveling up in Morrowind is a great idea, good system, riddled with incredibly poor balancing and a lot of very bad oversights. I hope you have a great rest of your day or night or whatever. I'm gonna go play Starfield, just so much Starfield. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. It should be out fairly, well, sooner than this one was. I had another schedule slip. I've put like 70 hours into Baldur's Gate 3. It is going to kill me. Yeah, have a nice night, or day, or whatever. Cheers. Hey guys, look, I finished the video before Starfield. This counts. Fuck you guys, this counts. I'm counting this. I'm taking the dub here. Fuck you. I'm gonna go play Starfield.